This is Mrs. Wainwright's class, Chapter 6, 7, and 8, Packet E, Lesson 6. Today we will estimate fractions, sums, and differences using a number line. Today's learning target: by the end of the lesson you should confidently be able to say, I can make reasonable estimates of fractions, sums, and differences using a number line. Remember, estimates mean we are not finding the exact answer, we'll be estimating the numbers and then doing the math. Sums are addition problems, differences are subtraction problems. So we will have both addition and subtraction problems where we will estimate first and then either add or subtract. We have some prerequisites or some things we need to review. We will have some review problems similar to these. So if we take a look at this page, we are doing fractions that are equal to 1. Let's take a look at our first picture. There is one whole Hershey bar. Of course, that's mine. I have one whole Hershey bar. Well, how many pieces of the Hershey bar does it take to make a whole Hershey bar? 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. It takes 4 pieces to make a whole Hershey bar. That's my denominator. My numerator is how many I have. And how many do I have to make that whole Hershey bar? 4. So 4/4 equals 1 whole. Let's take a look at our next Hershey bar. I see that I do have a whole Hershey bar here as well. How many pieces does it take to make a whole Hershey bar? 10. How many pieces do I have? All 10. So if I have 10 tenths, I have all 10 of the pieces. That is the same amount as 1 whole. Let's focus in on our third Hershey bar. I see that I have one whole Hershey bar here. It takes 2 pieces to make a whole Hershey bar, and I have 2 pieces. So I have all of the Hershey bar or the whole Hershey bar. Notice when we get to these that our numerator and denominator is the same. 2 halves, 10 tenths, 4/4. If you have all of the pieces it takes to make a whole, you have 1 whole. So when the numerator and denominator are the same, the fraction is equal to 1 whole. Let's take a look at our last picture. I have 1 whole Hershey bar here. How many pieces does it take to make the whole? 3. How many pieces do I have if I have all of them? 3. So again, 3/3, the number over itself, equals 1 whole. Please stop and complete the worksheet for prerequisites for 1 whole. This is prerequisite 2, and again you will have some problems that go along with this. We will be reviewing and focusing on fractions that are equal to 0. So let's take a look at our first fraction. There's nothing shaded in here. I have 0 Hershey bars. Boy, that stinks. Well, I do see the chocolate tray that's there. And how many pieces did it take to make a whole Hershey bar? There are 4 sections, so it took 4 pieces to make a whole Hershey bar. How many pieces do I have? 0, sadly. I have none. I have nothing. Nothing means 0. So 0/4 equals 0. Let's take a look at our next picture. Again, sadly, I have 0 Hershey bars. Well, how many pieces did it take to make a whole Hershey bar? 10. How many of those pieces do I have? 0. So 0/10 means that I have no pieces, means that I have 0 Hershey bars. In our third picture, again, I have 0 Hershey bars. How many pieces would it have taken to make a whole? 2. How many of those pieces do I have? 0. So 0 halves equals 0. Let's take a look and see if we notice something about all of these fractions. 0 halves equals 0, 0/10 equals 0, 0/4 equals 0. What do you notice about all of these fractions? Anytime the numerator is 0, the fraction is equal to the whole number 0. It means nothing. In our final example, again, I have 0 whole Hershey bars. How many pieces would it have taken to make a whole? 3. But I don't have any of them, so 0/3 equals 0. Please stop and complete the worksheet for prerequisites for 0. This is our next prerequisite for 1/2, and again you'll have questions that go along with it. We're going to talk about fractions that are equal to 1/2. So let's take a look at our first example here. This Hershey bar. That's a whole Hershey bar. It looks like I have half of it since half of it is shaded in. But if we look at the Hershey bar tray itself, how many pieces did it take to make a whole? It took 4 pieces to make a whole. I had half of that amount. What's half of 4? Half of 4 is 2. So 2/4 is equal to 1/2. In our next Hershey bar, again, if I look at it as a whole, it looks like I have 1/2 of a Hershey bar. But how many pieces did it take to make a whole? 10. I have half of them. What's half of 10? 5. So 5/10 is equal to 1/2. In our third example, again, it looks like I have half of a Hershey bar. How many pieces did it take to make a whole? 2. I have half of them. What's half of 2? 1. So I have 1/2 of a Hershey bar. Notice in all of our fractions, including the one that says 1/2, our numerator is half of our denominator. 1 is half of 2. 5 is half of 10. 2 is half of 4. So when your numerator is half of your denominator, your fraction is equal to 1/2. In our final example, again, it looks like I have half of a chocolate bar when we look at the whole thing. But this chocolate bar, when you look at the black sections, it takes 3 pieces to make a whole. How many of those pieces do I have? Looks like I have 1/2 of those pieces, but I can't write 1/2 on top of a fraction bar. Could say 1.5, which I know is 1/2, but I can't write a number with a decimal on top of a fraction bar either. So what am I going to do? Well, if I think about it, I can say 1/2 of 3/3 is going to fall right smack down in the center of 1/3 and 2/3. Hey, is that true up here? Is this 1/2 right smack in the center of 1/3 and 2/3? Well, let's take a look at it. This is the line where my 1/3 section ends. This is the line where my 2/3 section ends. Is my red line where my chocolate ends right smack in the middle of 1/3 and 2/3? Yes, it is. So half of a chocolate bar that's cut into 3 pieces, that's cut into thirds, is right halfway between 1/3 and 2/3. Please stop and complete the worksheet for prerequisites for 1/2. Let's take a look at example number 1 to see how this is done. Angel rode his bike to school today. The distance from his house to the end of the street is 1/6 of a mile. The distance from the end of his street to school is 3/7 of a mile. About how far is Angel's house from school? As with any word problem, we're going to look at the exact question. And it starts with the word about, and I know that means an estimate, not an exact answer. So about how far is Angel's house from school? Okay, let's see what I know. He rode his bike to school today. The distance from his house to the end of his street is 1/6 of a mile. And then I also know that the distance from the end of his street to school is 3/7 of a mile. I need to know how far is it from his house to school. I'm going to draw a little diagram because it's real quick to do and it makes it really easy to look at it and understand what the problem is asking. So in blue it says the distance from his house to the end of his street is 1/6 of a mile. So I'm going to draw Angel's house. Don't make fun of my drawing. There's the end of his street, and then that's where his street turns. Okay, so I'm going to label the distance from his house to the end of his street as 1/6 of a mile. Now in green it says the distance from the end of his street to school is 3/7 of a mile. So I'm going to draw his school right down here. And I'm going to go, that's right at the end of his street. And if we went straight down there, that would be 3/7 of a mile. So I need to figure out, the question is, how far is it from his house to school? Well, if I left his house and went down his street, that would be 1/6 of a mile. And, which is like plus, I continued from the end of his street to school, it would be another 3/7 of a mile. So if I add that together, I'll know how far it is. But again, the question said, and I circled because it's very important, about. So I need to find about how much this is by doing an estimate. Let's turn to another page and work on that estimate. So as it says on the top of the page, one way to estimate fractions is to use a number line. This is my actual problem, 1/6 plus 3/7. I know I'm going to need to estimate. So the first thing I need to do is focus in on my first fraction, which is 1/6. I need to look and see what my whole number is before that. There's no whole number. Well, no whole number is really the same as 0. So I know that 1/6 is going to fall in a number line someplace between 0, which would be at the lower end, and 1, which would be at the higher end. So let's go ahead and make a number line between 0 and 1. To make the number line, I focus in on my given denominator, which is sixths. I'm going to make my number line, and I usually do my little tally marks first, my little tick marks first. I start with 0, and I count up to whatever my denominator is. So here I go. I'm going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That tells me that my number line will be long enough. Now I will make my horizontal portion of the number line, going a little bit further on each end and putting an arrow. Now I'll label my number line 0/6, 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, and I should end with a number over itself, 6/6. So 0/6, when I go down to the bottom, I'm going to look at the benchmarks that I'll actually be rounding to. 0/6 is the same as 0. It will either round down to 0, it will round up to the very end. 6/6 is the same as 1, or it will round halfway between that. Halfway between 0 and 1 is 1/2. So I'm looking at the denominator of 6. What's half of that? 3. So 3/6 will be my 1/2 part. So what I do now is look at my original fraction, which is 1/6, and then I find it on the number line. It is right here. Here's the line right here. What is that closer to? Is it closer to the 0, the half mark, or the next number larger, which is the 1? I definitely think we can all agree that 1/6 is closer on the number line to the 0, so we're going to say 0 1/6 is about 0. This is an addition problem, so we will bring down our plus sign, and now we need to use the number line for our next number. So my fraction here is 3/7. Again, I know it does not have a whole number, so my whole number must be 0. Therefore, my number line is going to go from the low end, 0, up to the high end, which is 1. I know that my denominator is 7, so I need to break this up into 7 sections. How will I do that? I draw my little tally marks, starting with 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That ensures my line will be large enough. Draw my horizontal line straight through with an arrow at each end. I'm going to go ahead and label this. We have 0/7, 1/7, 2/7, 3/7, 4/7, 5/7, 6/7, and 7/7. We know that 7/7 is the same thing as 1. We know that 0/7 is the same thing as 0. We want our halfway mark. Well, half of 7/7 is an odd number. So what's 1 less than 7? 1 less than 7 is 6. What's half of 6? 3. So I'm going to look at this line right here for 3/7. Go back to my denominator 7. What's 1 more than 7? 8. What's half of 8? 4. So I know that someplace between here is where my halfway mark will be, and that's going to be right smack in the center right there. That will be my 0 and 1/2, or my 1/2 mark. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my fraction, which is 3/7. I'm going to find where it is on the number line. There it is. It is right up here. And is that closer to 0, 1/2, or 1? I think we're all going to be in agreement that that is most definitely closer to 1/2. So let's write it down. So now I'm simply going to solve, and again we should write it vertically. 0 plus 1/2 is going to be 0 and 1/2, or 1/2. So again, this is a word problem, so my answer needs to have a unit. The question said, about how far is Angel's house from school? So the answer will be, it is about 1/2. Well, what's the unit? It's not 1/2 of a house. Let's go back into the problem. 1/6 of a mile, 3/7 of a mile, so the unit has to be mile. Remember, I'm going to write mile because 1/2 is less than 1, and I would only write miles if it was plural, which means it's more than 1. So it's about 1/2 mile from Angel's house to school, and that's my final answer. Please stop the video and complete worksheet number 1 right now. Example number 2 says estimate 9/10 minus 1/4. Again, what's my whole number here? I don't have one, so it's 0. What's my whole number by 1/4? I don't have one, so it's 0. Nothing is the same as 0. I need to make a number line for my first fraction, which is 0 and 9/10. My denominator is 10, so that's how many spaces I'll count from, starting from the 0. So I'm going to say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That ensures it will be long enough. Put my horizontal line with arrows, and let's go ahead and label it 0/10, 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, 10/10. Let's find on the bottom the benchmarks I might round it to. It would either be 0/10, which is 0, 10/10, which is 1, or half of 10 is 5, so 5/10 would be my halfway mark. So find my 9/10 on the number line, and there it is from the top. Here it is from the bottom. Is 9/10 closer to 0, 1/2, or 1? It is most certainly closer to 1, so we'll write a 1 with a minus sign. Now we look over at our number on the right side. My whole number is 0, telling me that 1/4 will lie someplace between 0 and 1. My denominator is 4, telling me my number line has to be divided into fourths. So I will write my little tick marks starting with 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Put my horizontal line with my arrows and label it 0/4, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4. Find the benchmarks that I'll be rounding to. 0/4 is 0, 4/4 is 1, half of 4 is 2, so my 1/2 mark is 2/4. Find where this 1/4 is on the number line, and here it is from the top, here it is from the bottom. Is that closer to 0 or 1/2? Oh my, it looks like it's right smack exactly between the 0 and the 1/2. Well, just like when I round whole numbers and 5 falls right in between the 0 and the 10, 5 means I round up. Anytime I fall exactly in between two numbers, I am always going to round up, so I am going to say that 1/4 is closer to 1/2. Put 1/2 down here. I have the problem 1 minus 1/2. Again, for fractions, I want to subtract them vertically, so I'm going to say 1 minus 1/2, lining up my fractions in its own column, my whole numbers in its own column. You might know this because if I have 1 and I give you 1/2, how many will I have left? But if you weren't sure, you would borrow, take one whole chocolate bar away, open it up, you're going to make it into 2 halves. Now I can subtract 2 halves minus 1/2 is 1/2, and 0 minus nothing is 0. So the answer for this problem, 9/10 minus 1/4, is about 1/2. Please stop the video and complete worksheet number 2 right now. Example number 3 is a little bit different, and then it has whole numbers other than 0. So we have 4 and 5/12 plus 2 and 6/7. I know in my first mixed number 4 and 5/12, my whole number is 4. So 4 and 5/12 is either going to round down to 4 or round all the way up to 5, or in between 4 and a 5 would be 5 1/2. I'm going to follow the same format. I look at my denominator, and that tells me how many sections to break my number line in, so I'm ready to make my number line. Again, since my denominator is 12, I'm going to make my number line count starting from 0 up to 12. Ready? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Draw my horizontal line, my arrows at each end, because the number line should have arrows at each end. And this is going to be 0 twelfths, but it's really going to be 4 and 0 twelfths. Right? 4 and 0 twelfths, it's like 4 and 0, which is 4. This will be 4 and 1 twelfth, 4 and 2 twelfths, 4 and 3 twelfths, 4 and 4 twelfths, 4 and 5 twelfths, 4 and 6 twelfths, 4 and 7 twelfths, 4 and 8 twelfths, 4 and 9 twelfths, 4 and 10 twelfths, 4 and 11 twelfths, 4 and 12 twelfths. Now I have to see what benchmarks I'm using that I'll put at the bottom. Well, 4 and 0 twelfths, 0 twelfths is 0. 4 and 0 is 4. That would be my lower round down. Go all the way up to the right. 12 twelfths is 1, so 4 and 1 is 5. That would be if I rounded up. And what's my halfway mark of twelfths? Well, half of 12 is 6. So 4 and 6 twelfths right here would be my 4 and a half. So 4 and 5 twelfths will either round to 4, 4 and a half, or 5. Find my 4 and 5 twelfths on the number line, and here it is from top, here it is from the bottom. So what is it closer to? 4, 4 and a half, or 5? That's correct. It is definitely closer to 4 and 1/2. This is an addition problem, so I'll write a plus sign, and now I'm going to focus in on my next mixed number and make my number line. As you can see, I like to use different colors on the page when there's a lot of writing because it just stands out as what goes where. But in this number, I have the whole number 2 and the fraction 6/7. I know that it will fall someplace between 2 and 3. My denominator of 7 tells me how to make my number line. I need 7 sections starting with 0. So here I go, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Make my horizontal line with my arrows and number it. It's going to be 2 and 0 sevenths, 2 and 1 seventh, 2 and 2 sevenths, 2 and 3 sevenths, 2 and 4 sevenths, 2 and 5 sevenths, 2 and 6 sevenths, 2 and 7 sevenths. Let's find my benchmarks. 2 and 0 sevenths is the same thing as saying 2 and 0, which is 2. 2 and 7 sevenths is the same thing as saying 2 and 1, which is 3. Half of 7, I can't do that because that is an odd number. So what's 1 less than 7? 6. Half of 6 is 3. So here's my 3 sevenths. 1 more than 7 is 8. Half of 8 is 4. Here's my 4 sevenths. My half mark has to fall someplace between there and right smack in the center. That will be my 2 1/2 mark. Now I'm going to go back to my mixed number, which is 2 and 6 sevenths. Find it on the number line, and here it is from the top, here it is from the bottom. What's it closer to? It's definitely closer to the 3. So we'll add the 3 down here. I have the problem 4 1/2 plus 3. I'm going to write it vertically, 4 and 1/2 plus 3. 1/2 plus nothing is 1/2. 4 plus 3 is 7. So my final answer for this problem is 7 and 1/2. 4 and 5 twelfths plus 2 and 6 sevenths is about 7 1/2. Please stop the video and complete worksheet number 3 right now. And finally, my last problem says estimate 3 and 7/11 minus 3 and 1/10. So my whole number is 3. I know this answer will fall someplace between 3 and 4. My denominator is 11, so I know that I need to make 11 sections as I'm making my number line. So here we go. Let's make that number line. Start with a 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Put my horizontal line straight through with my arrows. So let's go ahead and number. I have 3 and 0 elevenths, 3 and 1 11th, 3 and 2 11ths, 3 and 3 11ths, 3 and 4 11ths, 3 and 5 11ths, 3 and 6 11ths, 3 and 7 11ths, 3 and 8 11ths, 3 and 9 elevenths, 3 and 10 elevenths, and 3 and 11 elevenths. 3 and 0 elevenths is the same thing as saying 3 and 0, which is 3. 3 and 11 elevenths is the same thing as saying 3 and 1, which is 4. Let's find my halfway mark. Well, what is half of 11? Oh no, it's an odd number. Okay, what's half of 10? 5. Here's my 5 elevenths. 11 plus 1 is 12. What's half of 12? 6. Here's my 6 elevenths. So my halfway mark will be right between them, and that would be my 3 1/2 mark. Find my 3 and 7 elevenths on the number line. Here it is from the top. Here it is from the bottom. I think we can see and we can all agree that that is going to be closer to 3 1/2. So I have 3 1/2. This is a subtraction problem, and now I'll make my number line for my next number. My number is 3 1/10, so it will fall someplace between 3 and 4. My denominator 10 tells me how many sections to make. So I'll start with my 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Put my horizontal line with my arrows, and let's number it. 3 and 0 tenths, 3 and 1/10, 3 and 2 tenths, 3 and 3 tenths, 3 and 4 tenths, 3 and 5 tenths, 3 and 6 tenths, 3 and 7 tenths, 3 and 8 tenths, 3 and 9 tenths, 3 and 10 tenths. Let's see our benchmarks at the bottom. 3 and 0 tenths is the same thing as 3 and 0, which is 3. Go to the end, 3 and 10 tenths. It's the same thing as 3 and 1, which is 4. I need to find my halfway mark. What is half of 10? That's 5. Here's my line right here, so this will be 3 and 1/2. So find my 3 and 1/10 on the number line. Here it is from the top. Here it is from the bottom. And I think we can all agree that that is closer to 3. So I have 3 and 1/2 minus 3. Let's write it vertically. 3 and 1/2 minus 3. 1/2 minus nothing is 1/2. 3 minus 3 is 0. And we know that the best way to write that would be to drop that 0 and simply write the answer as 1/2. Please stop the video and complete worksheet number 4 right now. So let's review. To estimate using a number line, we look at the fraction. The denominator tells us how many little tick marks to make for our number line. In this case, my denominator is 11. For 3 and 7 elevenths, the denominator is 11. I'm going to start at 0 and count 11 lines. Once I have my 11 lines, I make a horizontal line, and I do need to put the arrows at each end because a number line must have arrows at each end. I take the given whole number and start with a numerator of 0 with the denominator that I'm given, and I count all the way up and number each tick mark. So I would start with 3 and 0 elevenths and continue my way up to 3 and 11 elevenths. Next, on the bottom, I find my benchmarks, which would be my whole number by itself, which is whatever fraction has the 0 and the denominator. The whole number of 3 and 0 elevenths is 3. I find the number over itself, which is the whole number plus 1, in this case would be 4, and I find the halfway mark. Remember, if the halfway mark of an odd number, half of 11, we'll go 1 down. 10, half of 10 is 5. 1 up, 12, half of 12 is 6. So I'm going to find 5 and 6, and halfway between that would be the halfway mark for the whole number and 1/2. Next, I find the exact given number and see where that is on my number line. 3 and 7 tenths lies right here, so I see what that's closest to, and I can see in this example that's definitely closest to 3 1/2. That's my estimate. I write it down with the operation. In this case, it's subtraction. I do the same thing for the next number. This denominator was 10, so I started with 0 and counted all the way up to 10. Again, I need my horizontal line with my arrows, and I go ahead and label it starting with the whole number and 0, whatever the denominator is. So in this case, it would be 3 and 0 tenths. And I would label it all the way up to 3 and 10 tenths. I find the whole number. 3 and 0 tenths is 3. 3 and 10 tenths is 4. 10 is an even number, so half of 10 is 5. Therefore, 3 and 5 tenths would be 3 1/2. I find where that exact number is on the number line. That's where 3 1/10 is. I see what benchmark it's closest to. In this case, it's closest to the 3. I then take my number, I write it horizontally, lining up both my whole numbers in the whole number column and my fractions in the fraction column, and I go ahead and subtract. Sometimes I need to borrow, sometimes I don't, but I do go ahead and subtract. If my whole number is a 0, I can delete the whole number, so in this case my final answer would be 1/2. So hopefully by now you can confidently say I can make reasonable estimates of fractions, sums, and differences using a number line. As always, we will do plenty of practice in class. Please see a teacher if you have any questions or concerns, because we will gladly sit with you to help you understand this. Good luck with the lesson.